All right. Good morning. Good morning, dear friends. It is Sukkot, Chol Hamoed Sukkot, the first day of Chol Hamoed Sukkot for most of us. Mark, yeah, we know it's your second day of Chol Hamoed. Today is the 17th of Tishrei, third day of Sukkot. I think that covers everybody. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. We've had a little break, and regretfully, we're going to have another break after this, but we can't go too long without coming up for air. And so we're here to study Gemara. We're learning the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Masechah Shabbos, chapter 19, Kuf, Lamed, Vav, Amud Aleph. We're in a perek which is dedicated to the discussion of bris milah on Shabbos, circumcision on Shabbos. And as we've discovered, there are a number of potential questions about doing a bris on Shabbos. There are both specific halachic questions. There are macro global questions about the reason, the motivation, and the types of bris that may or may not happen on Shabbos, which has led us to a lengthy discussion. A number of the discussions that we've engaged in have really branched out past the essential Shabbos bris discussion and allowed us to explore some general circumcision subjects. And Mark reminded us we have just now, meaning last time we met, we were discussing the question of a baby who is unwell. Well, no, first we talked about a baby. We asked the question in general. We said a baby is always presumed to be vulnerable for the first 30 days. God forbid a baby passes away in the first 30 days. So then retroactively, in the eyes of halacha, we consider that baby to have practically been a stillborn. Now, I know the English word stillborn does not encompass a baby that was born alive, but in halacha, the word nefel means an unviable baby. Sometimes the baby doesn't make it past labor and delivery, but in the eyes of halacha, sometimes such a baby might survive, but would not live out 30 days. And so in a sense, there's a big tragic question mark about any baby until they reach the age of 30. And so we asked the question, a big question, how do we give a bris on Shabbos to a baby who might not survive? What would be the problem with giving a bris to a baby who might not survive? Well, then you're doing a malacha, but a neifel, again, we're going to use the word stillborn, but it's not a perfect translation. But a baby who is not going to live 30 days doesn't really need to have a bris. And if the baby doesn't need to have a bris, there's no mitzvah, then you're being mechal Shabbos. That was the question that was asked. The answer that was given by Ada bar Abba, who we determined is a moyel, and one of the great sages of the Gemara, says simple: if the baby survives, what you did was a mitzvah. The baby didn't survive, what you did was not a malacha. So you can't have both factors. You can't have a kosher bris and a malacha, and if it's a malacha, it's not a bris. I'm sorry. If it's a bris, it wasn't a malacha. And if it's not a bris, it was not a malacha because the baby was always going to pass. That was what the Gemara said. We then transitioned, we then moved on to a question we'd already addressed, and some of our chaverim brought it up even before the Gemara brought it up, which is, hold on a second, why don't we apply the same logic to a baby who we said is possibly a premature baby? A preemie is not a nefel. A preemie is premature. There's two different things in the eyes of halacha. There's a baby that's born prematurely, and therefore it is medically vulnerable, sometimes to the point of not viable. And then you have a regular baby who, for whatever reason, there is a unfortunate thing that would cause the baby not to be born. Why can't we apply the same logic? Dr. Hammer?
I had a question about the stillborn. Do we give that baby a name?
That's an interesting question. You're saying a real stillborn?
Either way, in this case, do you give that baby a name?
Well, I'll tell you this: a baby that passes away at 30 days already had a bris, already had a name.
No, without it, no.
But if the baby tragically passes away,
when you're not doing a bris.
I think Lamaisa today we do. But in the time of the Gemara, it's not so clear.
I thought the baby doesn't get a name till the bris.
Today the Chevra Kadisha, today the minhag is a baby that passes away before the bris. The Chevra Kadisha gives the baby a post, gives the baby a bris, removes the arla, and gives the baby a name. And they give names that are not used conventionally for the living. I don't have a lot more information for you than that, but there is such a thing. But I'm not sure where that was developed and how that's related to our Gemara. So not just for my lack of full awareness on the topic, I'm going to ask you, we'll have to keep our eyes open and see if the Gemara gives us, or the Farshim that we're going to explore, give us any deeper insight. But now the question is a more general question. A baby is a suffix viable, suffix not viable. We said that you don't give that baby a bris on Shabbos. But if you're able to give a baby, any baby, which every baby has a certain question mark, and you give them a bris, with the same mimana shach logic, either it's a viable baby and it's a kosher bris, or it's not a viable baby and what you've done is not a malach at all. Why don't we apply the same logic? So the Gemara answers a very shocking answer. The Gemara's answer is, yeah, you're right. Your question is so good. That's actually the truth of what we say. In Hachanami. Let's read the Gemara now. Amar Mar Brei de Ravina. Mar, son of Ravina, said, Ana, Rav Nechumi bar Zechariah targemna. We have interpreted the Gemara like thus. What have we said? Mimhal hachinami mahalinon lei. We give a baby who is possibly premature, possibly not going to live out his babyhood, but the bris is not going to expedite. That's the important asterisk we need to add every time, because otherwise it's a big question. We're not talking about that the bris is going to aggravate the baby's condition, because then obviously you're not going to give a bris. The baby is premature, and we're not sure if the baby's viable, but somehow, don't ask me medically how this works. The bris is also not going to aggravate the baby's condition, because I don't envision a scenario today where that actually is the case. But in the theory, we give the baby a bris, and the whole comment that we're not mechal Shabbos for a suffix 7, suffix 8, which again is a suffix primi, the baby might not be viable. The restriction is only about the malacha of to bring to the bris, but not the essential bris. The aliba de Rabbi Eliezer, and this follows the position of Rabbi Eliezer. What is, according to Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says you can be Mechal Shabbos. If you remember in the very first mission of this discussion, Rabbi Eliezer is the one I think who says you can make an implement, you can be Mechal Shabbos, you can be Mechal Shabbos in any way you want. Rabbi Eliezer is very lenient when it comes to Machshiri Mitzvah. As a matter of fact, the Gemara even asked, is there ever a case Rabbi Eliezer does not permit Hechsher Mitzvah? Remember that? He brought some scenarios where he doesn't. So, we actually do give a bris. And let's read Rashi. We have a statement that says don't be Mechal Shabbos for such a baby. All we're saying is we don't follow the most expansive, most lenient position of a Hechsher Mitzvah, according to Rabbi Eliezer in such a scenario. Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says you can fashion an ismal, you can fashion a knife of a bris. To Amar Dacha Shabbos, Hani Mili, the Kimle Begave, Shekal Chadashav, Shavrutes Chadash. When does Rabbi Eliezer say you can build a knife? Open a store in the mall, not build a bear, build a knife. Mishem Hes Chadashim Mishashim Sha'ad She'elai from conception till birth. Basically, long story short, the whole restriction as it pertains to being Mechalal Shabbos for a baby who's a suffix premature, according to Mar Brei de Ravina and Rav Nechumi, is only according to minority opinion. So again, we have a brisa. Actually, it's too far back to go back. That says that suffix Shiva, suffix Shmoina Ein Mechalin. That caveat, that restriction is only according to Rabbi Eliezer. Omar Abaya. I think Abaya here is giving us a little bit of a different interpretation. Omar Abaya. Oh no. Omar Abaya. question, Rashi, Nefel Gamor Im Chashav Kimes. So let's now take a step back. The Gemara made a shocking claim, or I explained the Gemara's explanation as a shocking claim. The Gemara says that a baby who doesn't live 30 days is, in the eyes of halacha, a stillborn. I told you that it's an inarticulate translation because a stillborn, by definition, doesn't survive labor. But the idea is that in the eyes of halacha, the baby was not destined to survive. Is this a unanimous take? So Abaye says, Kitanoyim. This is actually a machlokes Tanoim about the status of a baby who doesn't live 30 days. Rashi, Nefel Gamor. Im Chashav Kimes. Do we consider a stillborn baby like a mess? Do we really look at this baby who's alive and kicking? And again, I'm sorry, this is an insensitive, this is a little bit of a hard Gemara to handle because we're talking about a baby. But we're probing this in a very clinical and halachic sense. If, God forbid, one is to cut a baby that is going to die in 30 days or less, do we really consider this baby now as a non-living being for the purpose of halacha? So that's not 100% across the board. Amar Abaye Kitanoyi. There's actually machlokes Tanoim on the subject of the status and retroactively of a baby who doesn't live 30 days. Where do we see this? So now we're going to talk about an animal. Did we learn this last time? No. Dr. Hammer, go ahead.
I mean, I find this issue very insensitive to the human and psychological needs of the family, particularly the mother and the father. And if you translate it today, okay, a baby is born and the baby has serious issues. Let's say serious cardiac issues, missing this, that, okay, and they tell them it's a very serious condition, and there's a very good chance that the baby will not survive. We're going to do everything possible, but and then the parents ask, well, like you do with other issues, give me percentage. Well, it's less than 50. I'm sorry, but we're going to do our best, and let's hope for the best. And that would be I think the normal professional kind of thing. So this is saying, so, and then you're supposed to pray for the health of your baby when I don't understand this.
I'll explain to you why this is different. Because we're not, and again, admittedly, this is a clinical question about facts. When I say facts, I mean halachic facts, halachic determinations, not about how we navigate this emotionally. And sometimes there is a halachic opinion, and then there's an extremely different emotional way to navigate the circumstances. But that's not this case. Here, we're asking and by the way, I think Rebberal asked this question last time. Right, Rebberal? This is you asked it differently. Rebberal said, why don't we bring a doctor's opinion here?
Yeah.
So, Dr. Hammer, you're asking the same question. The essence is the same.
Yeah.
There's a very big question, and we're acting in how does the Gemara have the gravitas? How does halacha have the chutzpah or the koyach to make an assertion? So again, let me explain what's happening over here. A baby, we're not making a medical assertion. The baby passed away on day 27. We had no clue the baby's going to pass away. The baby passed away on day 27. Our question is, in the eyes of halacha, retroactively, what was this baby? We didn't know the baby had a cardiac condition because in the time of the Gemara, they couldn't do any of the tests that Baruch Hashem we could do today. And again, Baruch Hashem, my daughter Bracha survived odds that were in times past, and my wife and I discuss this all the time. Had she been born 10 years earlier or 50 years earlier or 100 years earlier, she would not have survived probably the first 3 days of her life. And so the medical world is absolutely miraculous. And they can do incredible things, and we can know incredible things. And that knowledge is power because we can intervene and save a life. In the time of the Gemara, that did not exist. So retroactively, when the baby does not survive, and we are retroactively determining the halachic status of this baby, in order to inform other halachic discussions, is this baby a nefel? Is this baby a baby that was really going to die anyways in the eyes of halacha? And the only relevance really was, do we presume every baby to be a potential nafal and then can't do a bris or not? Remember that was the question. So we're not talking about any specific baby, and we're not rejecting the babyhood of any baby, and we're not saying to harm any baby. We're asking really a theoretical question about a baby that already hasn't survived. In the eyes of Allah, is every baby who doesn't survive retroactively considered not to have fully lived for the purposes of certain halachic discussions or not? What is the relevance? A single issue. The circumcision. Is it considered a malacha or not to circumcise a baby who might not survive? Because in times past, many babies, unfortunately, were not many. A family looked at their baby with trepidation. There was a kind of probation. Is this baby going to survive? Not because they were insensitive, just because they were citizens of a universe where many babies didn't survive. And so all human beings viewed a baby, an infant, with a lot of insecurity and angst. There are many Jewish rituals, actually, about protecting. We've discussed this, I think, in the amulet discussion. There are many Jewish rituals that are all about protecting an infant baby, because so much can go wrong and so much did go wrong in times past. So the family didn't need to be made anxious. The family didn't need to be clued in. This was part of life. In the eyes of Allah, if a baby does pass, we consider them to have really been a baby who never really was going to live. And this is relevant.
Rabbi, even today with sophisticated medicine, we have crib deaths and unsuspected stuff.
Indeed. But I'm just trying to explain that our question really here is a abstract, theoretical, halachic question, and it doesn't ultimately have bearing on how the baby's cared for, and it doesn't have bearings with how we communicate to the family, with the exception, Dr. Hammer, where I'll admit that if God forbid the baby doesn't survive, if the family should happen to overhear that, oh, this baby is considered to have never lived, that would be that would rub maybe some salt on the wounds of a very, very painful experience. And so probably that conversation never needs to be had with such a family, because there's no halachic conversation that needs to be had with the family at that time. There's an abstract, hypothetical question about establishing general policy and how we give any baby a bris. That was the extent of that discussion. So I know maybe I said too many words, so I hope maybe I didn't clarify it enough, but that's my take. So it's an entirely a hypothetical, non-baby specific halachic question about how we clinically and halachically view this baby. When I say clinically, I don't mean how we medically view. I'm just trying to say that it's an abstract view, not a specific baby, and not in an emotional conversation. Amar Abaya Kitanoi. The question about the baby status is a machloikes of Tanoim. There's a verse describing animals, and again, on one hand, it's very unfair to compare a baby or a human to an animal, and the Torah is the first school of thought that's going to reject a total comparison of humans to animals. But in biological matters, there are many commonalities between humans and animals. So let's see this. If a kosher animal dies without shechita, so what's the question? Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz. The issue of whether a child who has not yet survived 30 days is considered viable, or there's a question mark, is similar to machlokes about an animal who is not shechted. If any animal of which you may eat shall die, if you touch its nevela, you'll be tamei ad ha'aref until evening. What is this? V'chiyamus min habeima she'lechem la'achla lahavi ben shmaina she'ein shchitasai mitarasai. This teaches us that a premature baby animal who the eyes of Allah considers not viable, shechting that animal is not going to make it kosher because the baby's not viable. The animal is not viable. And so you've terminated an already non-viable life. Rashi. Kitanoi, Nefil Gamor, and Choshev Kimes. We consider the baby, if you do a bris, as a possible chabur. So the animal, it says, the kule kra darsh lebeteres kainim mina behema mixas behemat mitama umixas any mitam probably shrefa shneir. Sorry, reading this fast. With my trefa shachla mechlal beter kayasher he lachem
I can do
So, anyways, long story short, Rashi points out, reminds us of the limud of this verse, that it's teaching us about shechting a kosher animal. And included in this pasuk is that it's not kosher to shecht a premature baby animal to make it kosher. Why? Why would shechting a baby that's premature and a baby animal, I'm sorry. Why would that not make the animal kosher? Because you think that by shechting you're killing the animal, but in the eyes of Allah, the animal is never really, really alive. The animal is, for all intents and purposes, destined to not survive. And so in the eyes of Allah, maybe the animal is considered dead. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Darhud, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, Omer, but there's a disagreement. They say, no, shchitasai mitarasai. When you shecht this animal, even if it's premature, even if it's likely not going to survive, if you shechted it, you killed it. And you made it kosher. If shechting an animal that's not likely to live is considered a kosher shchita, what does that mean? Until the baby died, until the baby animal died, it was not dead. Which, if we're going to extrapolate to a human being, a baby who passes, until they pass, even if you think they're likely to pass, they're not considered dead. For the purposes of this halachic question, again, I don't know how. I don't know if there's it's a jarring discussion to be having, but I don't know how to make it any more delicate or palatable than I am. So I'm just you can read Rabbi Steinzal. It's not that it's going to make any better, but just to see. The verse is interpreted as coming to include the offspring of 8 months. Large domesticated animals typically give birth after a gestation period of 9 months. If the animal of this sort gives birth after 8 months, its offspring is deemed not viable, and therefore its slaughter does not purify. Rather, it assumes the status of an unslaughtered animal, which is not only not kosher, but also makes ritual impurity. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Lazar ben Shimon say its slaughter purifies it, and it does not assume unslaughtered animal status. If it does not assume unslaughtered animal status, it means that in the eyes of Allah, it is a living animal. Now, this is a fluid conversation. So hang on. What is the crux of this debate? If shechting an animal, I already applied the commentary, but the Gemara is going to, what does it mean that shechting a non-viable animal makes it pure or not? Surely this is the essence of the debate. The second opinion says it is a living being. If it's a living being, you shecht it, well, then it's kosher. But the first opinion says, although the baby animal, although the animal is moving and kicking and doing all the things that a living animal does, it is so utterly destined to die, not because that is the scientific reality of this animal, that it's already considered dead in the eyes of Allah. And therefore, shechting it is not going to resolve a problem. Why? An animal that dies without shechita is impure and unkosher. If you shecht it, then the shechita killed the animal, now is kosher. But this animal, you technically shechted it, but you shechted a dead animal. You can't shecht a dead animal. And so this animal in the eyes of Allah, according to one opinion, is considered dead. Rava says, no, that can't be it. It can't be that the discussion here is if the animal is dead or alive. You know why? Amar Rava, and I think Rava is arguing with Abaye, right? Abaye is the one who wants to draw parallel between the discussion of the viability of a baby and the discussion of the viability of shechting an animal, notwithstanding how jarring that juxtaposition and that comparison is. Rava disagrees and says you can't even make that comparison for technical reasons. If you're having a debate about ritual purity, you remember the language we said when you shech the animal, it becomes tahar or not. Why is there no conversation about eating? You know, when we shecht an animal, shechita doesn't make the animal not impure. Shechita of a kosher animal makes the animal kosher. There's obviously something going on over here, Dr. Hammer.
But they pick out a case of a preemie, 8 months rather than 9 months. Well, I mean, there's nothing else about that, which is not analogous to what we talked about. The preemie being, not someone who's going to die.
The comparison would only be.
Go back. It said this is an animal that was born 8 months rather than 9 months.
Right, which is
doesn't say anything else about it.
Right. just as a general halachic principle, that baby or that animal is considered not likely to survive. And so that is what. So so the baby who's born premature is analogous to the baby human who's not going to live 30 days. It is not analogous to the baby that's going to live 30 days. It's only analogous to the baby who ultimately, because of an underlying condition, which we don't know about, doesn't survive. But I hear your point. I also struggled for a moment, like, why don't we compare preemies and preemies,
Right.
and a nafal and a nafal? So I really accept your point. But I suppose the Gemara finds it a good enough analogy, at least to have a conversation. Rava is in the process of rejecting the analogy. He rejects the analogy because it's a conversation about purity and impurity, not a discussion about kosher and non-kosher. Whether it is permitted to eat his offspring after his slaughter, there's no dispute that the animal is not kosher. Both rabbis here, whether you say the animal's tar or not, agree you cannot eat a premature baby that's been shechted, because the shechita doesn't really do what shechita needs to do. Ella, the kuli alma mesu. Everybody agrees that a premature animal, whose science of the time and the eyes of and halacha knows, is not going to live out. It's not going to live to adulthood, unfortunately. Everybody agrees that baby is halachically considered not alive.
Rabbi.
Yes, Rabbi.
What if in time that animal grows to be healthy? Does still rule apply?
You're asking if the unviable animal survives the period of unviability, does its halachic status change? That's a very good question. It's a very known question. I don't know the answer. I'm going to assume two options. Either I will say never, cannot happen.
Either it is or it isn't.
Very frustrating answer. So I'm not going to say that. If the animal survives past that point to adulthood, I'm assuming that it acquires living status when it lives past this period of uncertainty.
It's also interesting, Rabbi, that in those days they knew exactly when this animal got pregnant. We have difficulty today with animals and humans, but they knew then whether it was an 8 month or 9 months.
If Alan was with us, he'd be able to clarify further for us. I suspect it has to do with the fact that many animals have a specific season where they become pregnant. And so, especially if they're being raised, sometimes they will intentionally do things to inspire fertilization and pregnancy at a certain point. So they probably have a fairly good idea. If a calf is born a month earlier than all the others, they probably have a good idea. I mean, I may be wrong. Again, I think Alan is the person that would probably be able to weigh in best.
I would presume that the people who own cattle know more about it than any medical or veterinarian. They deal with it every day.
Right. But it's a good question. And yes, certainly it would appear that there was a lot of knowledge, intimate knowledge about livestock. And they were professional. They were farmers who spent, those who were raising animals and livestock spent the full time. Actually, the Gemara tells a story about one of the Tanaim, or maybe I'm Araim, which I'm drawing a blank now, who in order to be more professional in the halachic matters of animals, spent a certain period of time living among farmers and really getting an intimate knowledge of how animals lived. So that's an interesting point. Anyways, Ella de Kuli Alma Mesa. Rebel, your question is a good question. I don't know the answer. I imagine if it lives past that point, it would be considered presumed living. But in Jewish law, there's a lot of comfort dealing with chazaka, and we can establish halachic facts based on a generality, even if there is going to be an exception. The exception would need to prove itself, and absent the exception, we assume the rule in many halachic matters. So I'm not terribly perturbed by the possibility of an animal that's a preemie living into a ripe old age, but at the very least, halachically, it's considered dead. So what's the debate? Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, Savri Kitrefa. So now we need to clarify that there are three types of animals. There is a nevela, an animal that just dies. There is a trefa, an animal that has a certain sickness that's going to cause it to die. And if the treifa is shechted, it's not kosher, but it might have a different halachic status when it comes to ritual impurity. And then there is a kosherly geshachten animal. So let's see. Savri ketreifa, they view this premature animal that we say is destined to die. And Dr. Hammer, I think you use very interesting language, or maybe that the animal probably has a condition. Maybe it's a cardiac condition or something that we don't see, which would render it a treifa. It's not going to live because of its deformity. What is the halacha of a treifa? An animal that is injured and then shechted. Treifa lav afa gav demesahi. An animal that is tareif, even though it's destined to die, shchitasa mitaras. When you shecht it, it will no longer become tamei. It won't be kosher, but it won't convey ritual impurity. Similarly, here the debate is the animal that's a premature. I'm sorry, the baby that's the animal that's born that's premature, that we know is going to die, and in the eyes of halacha is practically dead. The debate is if you shecht it, do you allow it to avoid ritual impurity? The Chachamim say no. You can't compare a premature animal to an animal that is treifa. You know why? The animal that is treif was once a healthy animal. Today, it swallowed a needle and it punctured its lung, and it's a ticking time bomb. But before that moment, it was a living animal. The premature animal, never had a moment in its lifetime that it was going to survive. And Mordechai, you had a question? It's not going to live. You don't see any difference in the animal. All right.
Yeah, no.
Okay. So Mordechai asked an interesting question. I think some of us might be wondering, so I'm going to repeat it. He said, what happens? An animal is a treifa. The animal has an internal injury, but you don't know about it, and then you shechted it. So what then? So that's a very good question. And what Mordechai is really describing is the reason why a shochet in the old country had a title. You know what they would call a shochet? Shub. Shochet ubodek. A ritual slaughterer didn't just know how to wield a knife and kill the animal in a kosher way. They then had to inspect the certain critical organs of an animal to determine if there were any injuries that were fatal. And so shochatim or rabbanim or both of past and even until this day had to be very well versed in animal biology or physiology to know what a healthy heart looks like and an unhealthy heart looks like, to know what a healthy stomach of an animal looks like and an unhealthy stomach, and most famously, lungs. Lungs needed to be inspected. And there were certain things that disqualified a lung, and there were certain things that didn't disqualify a lung, but it wasn't glat. And that's where the origin of the word glat kosher, where there was something, a sircha or something on the lung, which didn't render it entirely unkosher, but it was not a good thing for an animal to have. And so, such an animal, you thought it was healthy, you shechted it, and then you discovered an injury. And the tragic fact is that animal cannot be consumed by a kosher consumer. And that's one of the reasons why kosher meat is so expensive. Because, and I was speaking to someone when I was in New York last time for a day, and I encountered someone who's in a restaurant and meat adjacent industry. And he was telling me that they were looking into Wagyu beef, kosher Wagyu beef. He told me the problem is that one kosher shechita has, I think, 4 or 5 unkosher animals. And so the only way you can go into kosher meat is if you have lined up distributors, non-kosher distributors, who can buy all of the non-kosher meat. Which, by the way, if you ever find yourself in a debate with a person about the perks of eating kosher, although there is a little bit of demagoguery involved in this case, to be honest, you can tell them, you know what non-kosher meat is? Non-kosher meat is essentially the rejects of kosher meat. At least what's rejected by kosher is perfectly fine to go to a 3. Can you have a 3-star Michelin restaurant? So, or 2, whatever. So that's one of the perks of eating kosher. Now, if you tell the person that eating kosher is more healthy, you're gonna have to explain how chopped liver cholent and pcha and deep fried lakshin kogel and latkes are healthy. I'm not making that case, but kosher meat, there is one facet that we are more concerned about the robust health of an animal than non-kosher meat. So Mordechai, did I answer your question? So it started out, you thought it was kosher, then you inspected and you found that's not kosher. That is essentially a treifon. And what we're saying here is it is not ritually impure, but it is not kosher for consumption.
So, Rabbi, we're saying that the shoichet has to know not only medicine but also pathology.
Yes. That would have been a more accurate way for me to say it.
But I'll tell you, in the shtetl, you have one shochet, maybe two, and that was it. And generally, from what there were no grades of glatt. It was either kosher or it was not kosher.
Yes.
You did not have, you're going to pay more for this one because I think this one is more kosher than the other one. Today, they made up all these grades.
Hadrin and all kinds of stuff.
This is
true. Once upon a time, there was maybe one shaychet and there was one rav. And let's say the shaychet could do general inspection, but if a shiloh would arise, they would go to the rav. And it's not always cut and dry yes or no, because in Shulchan Aruch we know there are different opinions, and so the rav doesn't just know kosher or not kosher. The rav has to weigh factors like the person's poverty, and to try to find a heter or not. And there are many stories where we say koicha de hetera adif. A rav who knows that to say not kosher was not impressive. It was more impressive for a rav who knew enough halacha to, when halachically appropriate, determine that the animal was kosher. And there are a number of big, famous inter-city debates between different rabbanim about different shilas. And it was not always considered a chashivas to make something not kosher.
Rabbi.
But the reality is that many times things weren't kosher. And by the way, a shochet, I don't believe, was paid if the animal was not kosher. And that's one of the reasons why a shochet needs to be a big yirei shamayim. Because for a shochet who works hard just to find out the shechita was not kosher, that's working for no pay. And so if you weren't a supremely God-fearing person, there's a very, very strong incentive to not make shilas and to not determine or bring up issues. And so much so, if just a little bit of politics, many times in the cities there was debates over who the Rav and the Sheikh were going to be. Sometimes it was Litvaks versus Hasidim. Sometimes it was different denominations of Chassidim. Sometimes it was different denominations of Litvak. So it's not exclusively the Chassid versus Litvak debate. But I know that in the Chabad world, the thing was, they said, let the Rav be a Litvak, but the Sheikh should be a Chassid. Yes. Because they wanted to be, they felt that the Shechita was a much more precarious situation. So they wanted to make sure that they could trust the Sheikh. Tragically, some cities ended up having 2 Rabbanim and 2 Shachtim, or 3 Rabbanim and 3 Shachtim. A big enough city could afford it. A small city couldn't. And so that was...
Rabbi, I think there's also consideration for the economic loss. If I remember correctly, somewhere there's a discussion about found meat, and they don't just paskin throw it out.
Yep.
Is there a kosher butcher in the area? I remember something.
The question about found meat, in part, is informed by the majority of the meat establishments in town and where it was found.
Right.
Yeah.
Would be easy to say throw it out today, but
it's
in those
easy to say
days,
throw it out. It's also, I think you're correct, that only today really there's a big thing about glatt. Because in the shtetl it wasn't. I mean, maybe some rabbanim were more strict or less strict, and if you were in a Sephardic town, they had chomris and kulis. So if you were a Sephardic rav, you don't think today they say Bet Yosef Chalak is considered a mehadrin meat. It's one specific issue about the lungs where indeed the Sephardim could be more machmir, but there are many other areas, and this is not a criticism, it's just the fact that there is nuance in art in any, and so the point is there were different opinions, and you have to be very, very well versed in those halachas to be a rav in a city. And the irony is, of course, today rabbis, I myself among them, have a very, very, very different role today than what the role of a rav in a city was. Once upon a time, the rav of the city was mostly dealing with what I'm calling clinical or kind of medical questions about animals or other shilas that were also highly and there was a highly specialized, very, and today most of what a Rav does or rabbi does is teaching and social work and
Whether you can go on your computer.
yeah. So it's a different world. I think Rabbanim of past would probably laugh very strongly and heartily at the people, myself included, who we call rabbis today. I'm not here to put myself down, but I think we can they would have a good laugh. This is a rabbi. But anyways, someone else was asking something. All right. So everyone agrees that it's considered mace.
Actually, on the finding of the meat, it's interesting how in certain times it's butcher, but we know that if a piece of meat was left out with a non-Jew and it wasn't washed, you can't trust it's kosher. So I don't know how that would play out.
Yeah, we'll touch upon it.
Yeah.
We'll touch upon it. You're right. It's not so simple that discovered meat, even Blasser Shenelma Min Ayin, meaning if you leave your meat in the custody of a person that's not kosher conscious or maybe not Jewish, then that meat is presumed in the eyes of halacha to be not kosher, usually absent certain possible conditions. So with Hashem's help, we'll discuss it, but not right here. So the Gemara says, hang on a second. What about treif mibeten? Maybe the animal was treif. It was born with a deformity. It was born in a time, it wasn't premature, but it was born with a deformity we didn't know about. Michael Meimar. So what will you say there? Why is that animal considered tahar according to the opinion who says that you can't shech the premature? Hasam yesh b'mina shchita. There, generally, it's type, it's kind, meaning the average animal that's born on time is kosher. Hacha'im b'mina shchita. But in a certain way, we're looking at a premature animal as a totally different story. In the genre of premature born animals, they never are viable. And again, maybe today with medicine, we could cause the animals to be viable. I have a feeling that farmers don't take premature animals to the neonatal veterinarian because I don't know if it's a good cost, arrangement. Dr. Pasternak?
Yes, yes,
Your doctor, go ahead.
yes,
You were asking a question, doctor?
yes. No, I want to go to the sukkah.
Okay, sure. Sure. The sukkah is open 24/7. We'd be very happy to have you on the sukkah. Yasher Koyach. And anyone else as well. Assuming you're not in St. Agath or New Jersey or in Israel, you're welcome to use the sukkah. Or Brooklyn, I'm sorry. I almost got in trouble. Eli, are you in the sukkah?
Do you want to see my sukkah? I didn't show you guys my sukkah.
Okay.
I got to show to you. I'm going there now.
Show us your sukkah. All right.
Okay.
So let's just close. Okay.
Hold on, I'm going to show you my sukkah. I forgot to show you guys.
Well, we're also getting a tour of your residence. So this is
my kitchen. This is my sukkah.
Hey, what's up?
Hey.
You have a nice view anyway, what I could see.
Hold on, we have to
You see it?
hold on, we got to make yours big.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not going. Oh, probably
Stop share. Hold on.
stop sharing. Stop the sharing.
Very
How's that?
nice. Ellie, thank you for sharing your sukkah with us.
Ellie,
Wait, let me
if you speak, Ellie, you'll become full screen.
Do we qualify as guests in your sukkah by this?
Please.
Virtual.
Virtual guest. This is my sukkah.
You're gonna come here.
Very nice.
Beautiful, Ellie. All right, my dear friends, what a subject. What a discussion.
Thank you.
Ellie,
With
thank
these nice
you
drapes.
it's good that we're closing off on the subject of your sukkah. But this is an important, if somewhat challenging discussion about the viability of Hashem's creations. And again, this was all informing a discussion about if you're allowed to give a bris to a baby if there's a chance that they might not live out 30 days.
Uh,
Lemaisa, we do. And that's the bottom line of this discussion, because every baby, although there's some question mark,
we
we
can go
consider them
to the sukkah.
healthy and viable. My dear friends, Chag Sameach, again, we're not, unfortunately, it's
Yeah.
not gonna work
Yes,
to meet up tomorrow. So tomorrow's Thursday. So Thursday, Friday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Wednesday is this Chag. So I'm sorry,
the
it's gonna be
weather
one
there,
whole
Rabbi?
week. It's gonna be one whole week till we do Gemara again. And then with Hashem's help, it'll be smooth sailing. And until then, let's load up on the holy days, the Kedusha of Sukkot. And
Rabbi, how's the weather over there?
Erev Sukkot was rainy, but just in time, the rain stopped. Baruch Hashem.
Oh
Hashem
wow,
was kind.
Okay. I was about to go on a plane today and come to Florida,
Should have come.
but I'm not feeling so well. My throat, my
okay,
ears. I don't know.
good.
I'm gonna go check myself out.
One
East Coast is
last
nice.
point. Shalom Ber built a sukkah mounted on the truck that's mobile. So if you know someone, or if you'd like to have a fast visit to your abode, a sukkah on wheels, call me afterwards, or Shalom Ber's gonna be doing chumash. You could hop on and make a request. My dear friends, I want to thank you so much for joining. It would not have been Chol HaMoed without. It's been hard to be apart this long, and I'm sorry we're going to miss each other for another week. But it should be
yeah.
Agut Moed, Moedim L'Simcha, Chagim L'Zmanim L'Sason. There should be days of celebration, of joy, and Hashem should bless this Chabur and all of Am Yisrael with all the brachas we need. And I look forward to resuming with Hashem's help in 1 week on Isru Chag, and then with Hashem's help, smooth sailing. Shkoyach. Agut Moed.
I get moed.
Good